Hi folks, how you doing? Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Restream. We're on episode number 14, and I'm really glad that you've joined us today. Had to take a little hiatus last week. It just turned out last week that I had some business to attend to. So, that is the nature of the beast. Sometimes I'm going to have to call an audible and postpone the show. So thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about house pricing strategies. It's a bit of a hot potato topic lately. And it's really, we're in this sort of like weird transition period in the market right now. So it's really actually important, and it's more of an art. I'll say this: it's definitely more of an art than a science. But we'll unpack some of the pros and cons of various different strategies. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me a comment, and let's see how it goes. When we return, we're going to be talking house pricing strategies. Excellent. So today's topic of conversation is house pricing strategies. And really, it's going to be really important that we make one distinction very clear before we get into the discussion. And that really is the difference between the price of a home that you set in order to market the property and in your efforts to sell the property, and the value of the home. Now, the value of the home here, let's bring this up here. We have to make sure that we don't conflate the two, right? They are not the same thing. The price that you put on your MLS listing or whatever listing it is when you are trying to sell your home, it's not the same thing as the home's value. And the distinction really boils down to these 2 points. So first of all, the price is a marketing tool. And you might have heard me say this before, but it really is true. The price that you place on your home is a marketing tool. And that's kind of unlike any other kind of product that you might sell, within reason. When you're selling chocolate bars, you're selling widgets, you're selling, items that you've made as a craft, you're trying to actually recover some costs. You're trying to recover, the material cost, the time it takes you in order to produce the product. And to a certain extent, what you're trying to do is to take the value of the product, as in what it would cost, and you're trying to recover your expenses and determine the value of the product. And that's when you come up with that calculation, that's what you sell the product for. Houses are a little different. You are, in most cases, trying to recover some expense. Of course, no one wants to sell their house for less than what they paid for it. But when assuming you've lived in the home for a while, you've earned some equity, that sort of thing, the price that you're going to put on the house is, by and large, a marketing tool. And I'll explain what it means in terms of a marketing tool as we go on. But we want, for the time being, to make sure we understand that is different from the value of your property, because the value of the property really is it's kind of it's kind of obvious, but the value of your property is the amount that anyone at any given time, anyone is willing to pay for the property right now, right? So the value of the property is, whatever someone's willing to pay. How do you know what someone's willing to pay? Generally, you're not going to know until you offer it for sale, right? Which will require you to put a price on it. We will speak of market value, and that, again, is different from the price. So, very often, it's the first question that you get from a prospective client who wants to sell their house is, how much do you think my house is worth? Usually what they're looking for is a value, right? They're trying to figure out the value of their property. And so a skilled real estate agent will then do some research. They will look into other properties that are similar, that have sold within a relatively short time frame, within ideally the same location, ideally it's the same kind of house, that sort of thing. And they will attempt to determine what the current market value of the property is. Now, that will be a factor usually when it comes to the price, but the price is a distinct entity. It is a distinct number, right? And it does not necessarily reflect the full value of the property. I think as we progress, it'll be clearer what we mean by this. So when it comes to pricing the property, once we have that distinction in mind, that the price is different from the value, there's lots of different strategies and techniques for calculating or estimating the value of the property. When it comes to pricing, there's really three different approaches to pricing a property. And this is, kind of commonsensical. You're either going to price the property low, or you're going to attempt to price the property at or near the actual market value of the property, or you will price the property based upon whatever it is you want out of the property. And generally speaking, the assumption here is that you're probably asking more than a reasonable assessment of the market value, right? So you're either going to price low at market value or high-ish, because let's face it, sometimes, and they're challenging, but sometimes there are situations where the seller really does not have a whole lot of leeway in terms of how they're going to price their property. Sometimes they just either need a certain amount of money out of the property in order to cover their expenses or the purchase they're trying to make, what have you, or there'll be a number that they just want. So I will not leave my house. I love my house so much, I'm not going to sell it for less than, whatever that may be. So let's take a look at these various strategies. Now, we've seen in the current market, we've seen a lot of the price low strategy. And usually, first of all, there are, of course, many, many variations on all these strategies. So in a sense, I'm trying to speak in generalities. And you could really, you could do a deep dive analysis into all the variations. But for the sake of our discussion, let's just talk about, what is kind of common at those various different price points. So what's common, and we've seen this often lately, this strategy is tapering out a little bit lately because we're seeing some market fluctuation. But say like in March and April, this was the strategy to price the property lower than market value, and then to set a date at which you intend to receive all, as the seller, intend to receive all the offers, with the hopes that on the offer date, you'll have multiple offers competing on the property. It is important to make note here at this point in the discussion, and I don't want this to be forgotten. The price, the strategy, all these decisions are really the seller's, that is the property owner, the person who owns the property, who's trying to sell the property. It is their decision what strategy to choose and how to move forward. It really is important. I think sometimes this is lost when we talk about, real estate agents talk, when people talk about selling their properties. Sometimes they forget that it is my role as a real estate agent. It's just that I'm your agent. I'm going to advise you in terms of what I believe the current market. I'm going to use as much of my knowledge and background and expertise in the real estate market as possible to advise you, but ultimately the decision is always up to the client, right? So if the seller chooses to pursue the price low strategy. It is their choice, right? It's not the agent saying you should. It's not the agent saying do this. The agent might say you should do this, but it's always your choice as the client. So if you're nervous about what is being proposed, make sure, as a client, make sure you're voicing your concerns and you're asking questions and getting back as much information as possible from your real estate agent. And always keep in mind that it is your decision how to proceed with the sale of your property. So that's important, right? So what we're seeing lately is, or what we have seen recently, is this strategy: price low, set a date, and ultimately attempt to bring about some sort of auction, more or less, of your property. In some cases, the March-April period, we saw some craziness, where there was dozens of offers on single properties, and people, were just going nuts trying to get their offers in. Okay, so let's talk about some pros and cons. There are some, well, it looks like, you see those little squares there? Those were supposed to be thumbs up. And those little squares there, they're supposed to be thumbs down. Oh well, I guess they didn't turn out. Anyhow, there are definitely some benefits that I've seen people realize employing this strategy. First of all, and this is kind of intuitive, right? You can imagine this is actually a pretty easy strategy to employ. You, basically come up with a number that's generally on the low side. You can come up with a number and you don't need to know in any particular depth where the market is, what the property might be worth in the market. I mean, of course, you have to be able to have a ballpark what the market value of the property is, but ultimately just come up with a low number, right? And the point of coming up with a low number is really this, because what you want to do is to attract as many people as possible. And this is what you're hoping, right? You're hoping that people looking for the property similar to what you're selling will be attracted by the low price, and that will drive a lot of traffic through your property. So lots of people will be interested, lots of people will see it. And ideally, this will result in lots of competition, which will turn into lots of offers. And this competition will, we're talking, straight up, supply and demand sort of theories, right? Lots of competition for one single property means that theoretically that competition should drive the price higher and higher and higher of your selling price. So that's really what the whole price low, set a date strategy is meant to leverage, right? That's the sort of theory that it's working on. Excuse me one sec. Excuse me, very sorry. Allergies are killing me this time of year. However, right, and make sure you're talking with your agent. If this is the strategy that you are contemplating, that maybe your agent is proposing, make sure you give ample consideration to the cons, right? These are the pros, and I've seen it work. I've been involved in situations where it's worked amazingly, but I've also witnessed this strategy fail, for lack of a better term, and really be problematic. So first of all, you have to keep this in mind, right? This sort of strategy is only effective in a seller's market, and apparently it's really only effective in at a certain point in a seller's market. We're here right now, right, in a seller's market based upon conventional wisdom that says, when the inventory is as low as it is now, it's a seller's market. Well, inventory is increasing a little bit, but it's nowhere close to the numbers that conventional wisdom tells us is, a balance or a buyer's market, right? So we're still pretty securely, like I say, based upon conventional wisdom, in a seller's market. However, the price low auction strategy is really not gaining a lot of traction right now. Now, I really only have some anecdotal evidence to suggest this, but seeing it a lot more likely that this strategy is not really working right now. And for one thing, what happens when this sort of strategy is employed for a sustained period of time, you imagine there's a lot of stress involved in this sort of strategy. If you're a buyer, if you're a buyer out there, and every property that you're interested in is being sold at this high pressure auction, well, that can have the effect of really discouraging buyers. And that, I think, is what's happened lately. Right in the moment, buyers simply don't have the patience for this kind of strategy. So it's not the price low strategy. It's not a silver bullet. It does have its drawbacks. It's really only effective in the seller's market, and it's really only effective so long as the buyers out there aren't sick and tired of it. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. Another thing is, this sort of strategy will attract a lot of buyers, assuming, like I say, the buyers aren't just tired of dealing with it, right? When it's working, it's attracting a lot of buyers. It's bringing a lot of people through your house. And here's the problem. A lot of times, it's bringing people through your property, right? It's into your house, who have no business being in your house because they simply can't afford what your house is really worth, right? It's one thing to look at a number, which is a pricing strategy, right? A price, which is a marketing strategy. And there will be a lot of people out there that say, oh, $350,000, I can afford that. So they go to your house, and when it comes right down to it, they can't afford the $400,000 that you really want to get into your house, that your house is really worth when we're talking value. So a lot of time can be spent on this strategy dealing with people who just frankly are qualified to buy the property. Finally, I'll mention this strategy, and I've hinted about this already. It just sometimes it doesn't work. Like right now, it's this strategy, despite being a seller's market, is not as successful right now as it was, say, in the March-April period. And what does that mean? Well, imagine yourself as selling your property. You get to your offer date, and the offers don't show up, or the offers that do show up are not as high as you were expecting or needing them to be. Well, then what do you do? Well, here's what would often happen. Often what would happen would be, you would end up talking with your agent. In consultation with your agent, you will decide, okay, so you know what? It turns out what I really am thinking I want to get out of the house, or what I think the market value of the house is X, this amount. You end up having to increase the price of the property and then relisting it, right? Well, that's going to take time. That's going to send an interesting message to your potential buyers. Imagine that, right? You're interested in the property. You've been following the property on MLS, and all of a sudden you see, you reach the offer date. Maybe you're even one of those people that made an offer on the house that you didn't think was satisfactory. It wasn't enough, right? As the seller. Well, as the buyer, you might think, when you see then the property increase in its listing price, that might put a bad taste in your mouth. And I've seen it happen, right? Again, anecdotally, right? We're not talking, I took a survey of 1,000, potential buyers, and they responded negatively to this increase in listing price. But I have spoken with buyers who have gotten discouraged, who have gone through this process, who have made offers on properties and then seen them turn around and relist it at a higher price. Well, it can be detrimental. It can ultimately mean basically what you're doing is giving up on this strategy and moving on to one of the other strategies. Last but not least, and this is, I think, what you really need to take to heart. When this strategy is working and people, and there's intense competition and the buyers are just going nuts and the buyers are being enticed to increase their bids on your property to heights that you didn't even imagine possible. Well, you have to be sure that, regardless of the conditions or the lack of conditions that you see on the offer, come closing day, you want to be confident that whoever has offered you some astronomical number to purchase your house, that they are, in fact, when it comes time to close that property, prepared to pay you that amount of money. And we're seeing very often, I wouldn't say very often, but we have seen from time to time that deals aren't closing because, frankly, someone got caught up in the bidding process. They bid more than the property was worth. And then when it came time to go to the bank and say, hey, I need this much money in order to buy this house, as much as you might love it, and even if you're sitting there thinking, I love it so much, I'm willing to pay this amount of money, well, the bank has to turn around and say, well, wait a minute. Does the house have enough value? The value, however, the appraised value, right? However the bank decides to determine that value, is that number high enough to justify the loan that the buyer is asking for? And it's happened. It is, you gotta take my word for it. It's happening. I don't know how often it happens, but I do know it happens. It's one of those things, it's like it really sucks when it happens. So, there's real terrible situations. So those are sort of the times you hear about them, right? When it's like a terrible, scary situation. Well, it happens. Sellers get to closing time and they get that phone call from the lawyer. Buyers couldn't close. Now what? Well, basically you're going to have a much longer conversation with your lawyer, and it's going to end in a couple different ways, and none of them are going to be good, right? They're going to be, someone needs to get sued by you, which is going to cost you more as a seller to, work with your lawyer. Lawsuits, relisting the house. It just gets messy. I don't even want to speculate, but it does happen. And when the deal doesn't close, bad things happen. No one's happy. The seller's not happy. The buyer's not happy. And then it might lead you to ask yourself, okay, if this is a legitimate risk of employing this strategy, is it the strategy that I want to take from day one? All right. So, of course, there's what is probably the most common, aside from all considerations, the last, over the pandemic, over the last 6 months, usually, I don't know if usually is the appropriate word, but, what I think is most common is that a house is listed at or near the market value. So effectively what this strategy involves is the real estate professional working with the seller will do the research, will attempt to estimate the current market value of the property, and that number will inform the price that's set on the property. So, and I say inform, what'll often happen is you'll do something like this. You want to give yourself some wiggle room because, again, it's a marketing strategy. Negotiations is part of selling the house. So you determine what the market value of, you estimate what you believe the market value of the house to be. The seller will consult with their agent, who will ideally do the lion's share of that research. And then, you'll probably end up listing the property at, some number slightly less than that, or round, right? If you think, if the market value assessment comes back at $424,000, you might list at $415 or $420. And what is most common is that you accept offers whenever they come to you, and you ask the person that wants to buy your property for a reasonable amount of time to assess the the offer when it comes to you. Now, it never fails. You're going to get that offer. They want an answer in 1 hour or 15 minutes. And that's part of the negotiation. But, the agent should help the seller and manage that sort of situation. But for now, we're talking about, just, having a reasonable amount of time to consider the offer. So let's consider the pros and cons. Now, the pros and cons of this particular strategy. First of all, I think it's probably the most versatile strategy, right? It should generally work, depending on what you decide work means, right? I mean, if you mean work is sell your house in 3 days, well, chances are you want to go back to this price low strategy. This is one thing that I actually didn't mention. Sometimes it's a pro, right? Sometimes it's when this strategy works. When it was really working, this price low strategy, back in April and March, people were selling their houses 7 days flat. It's like, oh, we're going to go into the process and right out of the process. Great. All we have to do, right, is endure the stress between the day that we sold firm and the closing date, and hope to God that the buyer, come closing day, is able to get their mortgage and close the deal. Well, this sort of process, it may be more versatile, but it will take a little longer. And I put that down there, right to here we go, right here under the cons. Sometimes it'll take a little bit longer to sell the house, but it is a strategy that should work in any market, whether it's a buyer's market, a balanced market, or a seller's market. You should, be less likely to have to deal with the unqualified buyers. If you're marketing your property at what is believed to be, market value, then, the general public looking at the listing, you're going to get less of the, oh, I can afford that, less of the sort of traffic that you get by employing a price low strategy. And when I say less traffic, I'm saying this is a pro for this particular strategy, because what you're trying to do is really target the people that legitimately can afford to buy your house. Now, that's not to say, just because you have less traffic, that's not to say that you can't have competition. This strategy very often leads to multiple offer situations, right? So there's still some of the upside that you're trying to get when you price low. By pricing at market value doesn't necessarily exclude the possibility that there could be some really serious competition for your property. And I tend to think, in contrast to that price low strategy, when people have better consideration for, when you're getting more qualified buyers to the table to compete for your house, it is more likely in the end that your deal will close. You're a heck of a lot, and it's strictly a numbers game, you're a heck of a lot more likely to get people to the table that are pre-qualified at the amount of money they will need to buy your property when they're looking at the ad, and the ad gives a reasonably true assessment of what the actual market value of the property is, which you just don't have when you have people trying to just get a property and they've been enticed to the property because it was listed so low. And then they fell in love, and now they're blowing their brains out making an offer. Those are the sorts of people that are, in the end, most likely going to disappoint the seller when they're not able to close the deal. So this sort of strategy, though, it does require some current market knowledge. You really do need to have a knowledgeable realtor to advise you, to help you out. They have to be aware of the market. It's probably a good idea in these situations to use a local realtor, right? One of the reasons I think in some of the regions in the outskirts of Toronto that we're seeing so many properties listed by Toronto realtors is because the strategy allows them to. The strategy of price low and hope for a bid doesn't require local expert knowledge of the market. Say, oh, well, I looked up a couple, the average selling price was maybe it's, was this much. I just put a price on the property for $100,000 less, and I'm hoping for the best, right? It doesn't take a lot of knowledge to do deep understanding of a local market to engage in that sort of strategy. Now, another drawback, right, is it may take longer to sell the property. That's not necessarily the case, but it may. It may take you a while to actually wait it out for someone to come to the table with an offer that is at the fair market value of the property. And what we were seeing with the price low strategy, there were very few successful offers that included any conditions whatsoever, right? When we were dealing with price low, one of the reasons I think we're seeing deals not closing was because the people attempting to make the purchase, the bidders, were so carried away with, so excited by the process of securing the property. They were very eager. Clients of my own were the same way, right? And it's hard to talk people down when they're getting all caught up in the fervor of purchasing a house, which they've already fallen in love with. In the 15 minutes that they toured the house, they're willing to let's waive the condition of finance. Let's waive the condition of inspection. Well, in the end, if you don't have a condition of finance, right? So you don't know if the bank is going to lend those people that amount of money, right? And so we saw, and we continue to see, deals that follow the price low strategy fall through. Well, so we might say that when we're marketing at or near market value, when we're pricing at or near market value, we may indeed see more conditions, and that it can be construed as a con, as a drawback of the offer. Well, it may prolong the process of selling the property, but at the same time, it might give the seller a little bit of security, right? I would rather wait 3 to 5 days for my prospective buyer to get the A-OK confirmation from the bank that they will indeed get their mortgage than to wait a month, 30 days, 60 days, however long the closing is, to find out on the day of closing that they didn't get their mortgage. So is this a con? I'd say it's both. Yes, you might have to deal with more conditions, but guess what? Those conditions might also give you the sort of security that will allow you to sleep at night, knowing that the buyer has secured their mortgage and they're not going to go into breach of contract come closing day. All right. Last but not least, right? When you list the property based upon what you want or what you need, right? And this is, again, it's fairly simple. You just set the price based upon what you want or need. And sometimes this happens. Sometimes it's the unfortunate truth. You go to the bank and they say, look, if you, for example, you're trying to purchase a property, maybe you family is growing and you really need to upsize, move into a bigger property. Your bank could say to you, well, you can afford this much house, but only if you sell your house for your current property for this number. And that happens, it can be tough. There have been sometimes people have to sell their house for unexpected circumstances. They have to, their job is sending them to live in another country. They're relocating. You're being transferred to another branch or something like that. Well, If your employer decides that you need to relocate during a lull in the market, you might be stuck in a situation where, in order to recover what you paid for the house, you technically have to list it for more than it might be worth in terms of its market value. These things happen. So this particular strategy, I really am based on the assumption that the number that you're coming up with is higher than a reasonable assessment of the market value. And I think you can see where we're going here. There's really not a whole lot of upside, right? Pro number one, it's easy to implement in terms of the actual determining, like calculating the number, right? It's easy to figure out what the price should be if you just need a certain number. That's the number, regardless of what the assessment of the market value might be. Is it easy to execute in terms of marketing and ultimately selling the property when you just have to hit a certain number? No, not at all. When the seller needs a certain number, well, that agent has to be prepared to hustle, to market that property, and to really target the sort of buyer that is appropriate to come to the table with the right number. On the other hand, right, easy to implement, yes, easy to figure out the number. And in the end, if the strategy is successful, well, the seller gets what they want. And that is really, that is a benefit, right? When the seller leaves the property, I got exactly what I wanted. Now, of course, this is contingent upon the pricing strategy well being effective and ultimately concluding with the sale. On the other hand, if you're pricing your property higher than market value, you can really expect that fewer prospective buyers are going to be coming to the table. It's likely that you're not going to see as many interested parties looking at your property if they're looking into MLS and they're looking at what's out there on the market, and they're thinking, wow, there are other similar properties selling for a lot less, or maybe not selling for a lot less, just in situations where the seller is asking less for the same amount of house. So that's likely going to affect the traffic. It's also, likely to take a very long time. If you have to sit and wait for that right buyer to come to the table with the right number, you do have to be patient and be prepared for the sale of the property to take a while. You're also more likely to attract lowball offers. Now, here's the truth, though. Almost regardless of what you list your house at, chances are very good your real estate agent is getting a phone call from some other agent offering some ridiculously low number, because there are some agents out there that's just their whole game. All they do is test the waters. They contact every new listing possible, and they are testing to see how desperate the seller is. Is the seller desperate enough to take this low number? Now, that will happen. I think actually it's less likely to happen if you're employing the price low strategy. But when you think about it, anyone that comes to the table, if you're employing that price low strategy, anyone that comes to the table and offers you asking price, it's kind of lowballing you, right? If the whole point is you're listing significantly less than market value just so you can attract more interested parties to the table. You call that lowball? Well, technically no, I guess. But anyhow, when it comes to when you're trying to sell high, that is when the, let's say, more aggressive buyers out there will test the waters. And don't get mad when your agent gives you a call to tell you that they've received an offer that is ridiculously lower than your asking price. They are obligated to do so. They should be explaining to you that they're obligated to do so. But that's their job, right? We are obligated as real estate sales reps to present within a reasonable amount of time every offer to purchase that comes to them. It's got to be presented to the seller. whether that's a phone call or an actual formal meeting, that's up to them. That's up to you as the seller, to say, this is how I want the presentation to happen. But anyhow, they do have to present, even the lowball offers. Here's another thing. If you're asking more than what might be reasonable in terms of the market value, you probably should expect that the offer is going to include more conditions than you might otherwise see on the offer. Why is that? Well, of course, there's some intuitive sense to it, right? If I'm going to spend this much money, I have to make sure that the property is in the best possible condition. If me as a buyer, if I'm considering paying maybe what might otherwise be considered more than market value. So you're very likely to see inspection conditions. You're very likely to see finance conditions. And if you're in this situation, you might, everything involved in selling your house is a trade-off, right? Someone who maybe is urgent to buy a property, but they haven't yet sold their existing property, maybe they would be willing to come to the table for more money. Why? Because they might ask you, they might effectively in their offer say to you this: I'm willing you to pay that little bit more if you're willing to be patient with me while I sell my current property. You're more likely to see inspection conditions. Why? Well, because inspection conditions, home inspections, very often turn up items that might affect the final sale price. So if I'm a buyer considering spending more than or paying more, or I've offered more than might be, market value for the house, and I send my inspector in and they give me a laundry list of items that need to be addressed, well, I'm going to probably do a few things. One of them is going to be, I'm going to get in touch with my agent and ask my agent, say, hey, look, the seller has to fix A, B, C, and D, or they have to take this much money off the sale price for that issue, this much money off the sale price for this issue, this much money off the sale price for this issue, right? So the items that turn up on the inspections may very well turn into negotiating points, right? That may ultimately drive down the price. And that might, in fact, be the point of the buyer including the condition, the inspection condition, so that they have some ammunition to say, hey, look, you're asking this, but there's $30,000, there's $50,000 worth of work that need to be done on the house. You can either fix it, spend the $30,000 and fix it, or you can take it off the price, and it becomes a negotiating point. So there we have it, really. We have these three strategies, and they all have their pros, they all have their cons, and they all have their place. One thing I didn't mention, right? This sort of strategy, when you're asking for more than asking, it's very, very, very unlikely that this strategy is going to work in a buyer's market, right? If the market is just flooded with inventory and the buyers are able to pick and choose, they're certainly not going to pick and choose the expensive property. They're probably not even going to pick and choose the expensive property when it comes to a balanced market. So they all have their place, and they all have their pros and cons. Make sure that when you're making a decision, right, that you're as a seller, that you're talking with your agent and you're getting as well informed as possible, because ultimately the strategy is your decision as the seller. The agent can advise you, and your agent should advise you. And you know what? If you got to keep in mind, your agent is the professional, the person that does this for a living. But make sure that you are comfortable with the strategy before you allow your agent to take you down a certain path. And also make sure that they're using the right paperwork to implement these strategies. But, it's worth a question. What paperwork, what forms need to be filled out to implement these strategies? that could be an entirely different show. Anyhow, before I leave, I hope this was helpful information. It really is a hot button topic, and I think there is a general belief among sellers that you engage a real estate agent, and your agent just sort of says, "Yep, this is the one that you got to use." Well, it's important, in my opinion, to be as transparent as possible as an agent, and to share as much information as possible, and to ensure that my clients. I always want to make sure that my clients are comfortable with the decisions being made, and make sure that they feel that they have a say in the matter, because they do. It's absolutely imperative that the client is guiding the process. Before I go, I want to invite everyone out on August 15th between 1 and 3 o'clock to the Brock Golf Course. Myself and Josh, Josh is a friend of the show. We are together hosting a great fundraiser. We're calling it mini golf for mental health. So you come out, play rounds of mini golf. All the proceeds, basically all the fees that fees are the same as any other day. There's no difference, but where the money is going, that's what's different. So come out, play mini golf. It's lots of fun. It's not very expensive, and all the proceeds are going to go towards the Niagara branch of the Canadian Mental Health Association. We're going to have lots of fun. I'll be out there. Josh will be out there, and I'm really hoping to see all the Niagara region families come out and show their support for this great cause. I'm really looking forward to it. If you found the show insightful, helpful in any way, please don't hesitate. Hit the like button. Please subscribe. I come at you almost every week. Some days I have business to attend to, but I'm here. I think I'm at like 80%. 80% of the time, I'm here at 7 p.m. on Tuesdays, sharing as much advice and information as I can. Again, aiming at trying to give some common sense advice to real people who have to navigate the real estate market, right? Buying and selling their homes. It'd be great. It'd be a great sign of support, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like, subscribe to the show. And of course, if you have any questions or any real estate needs, if you're in need of any real estate services, please don't hesitate to give me a call, send me a text, write me an email. I will definitely respond. I'll take Facebook messages. I'll even respond to smoke signals if I see them and can work them out. Thanks again for joining me. I'll see you next week for another episode of Restream.